Have you ever wondered what truly happens in someone's mind when you simply disappear? Not when you pull back slightly. Not when you delay your responses. I mean when you vanish completely. No calls, no texts, no explanations. Most people think disappearing is petty or manipulative, but here's the Stoic truth. Silence is not manipulation. Silence is a boundary. Absence is clarity. Walking away is sometimes the only language people finally understand. Today, we are diving into the psychology of why your disappearance shakes someone to their core, and why it becomes one of the most uncomfortable experiences they ever face. The modern world has conditioned people to believe that others will always be available. They assume you'll reply. They assume you'll stay. They assume you'll forgive. They assume they can treat you casually, yet still keep you emotionally on standby. This video flips that script, because the moment you stop showing up is the moment everything changes. And if you've ever been taken for granted, overlooked, unappreciated, or treated like an option, this message is for you. Stoicism teaches that power is not loud, it is silent. The strongest shift you can ever make is learning to detach without anger, without theatrics, without warnings. Disappear, quietly, intentionally, and without malice. Let your absence speak for you. Here's what most people don't understand. When you disappear, the psychological impact on the other person is far bigger than the words you could have said. Humans crave certainty and validation. They expect emotional continuity. When that continuity is broken, the mind spirals. Your silence forces them into discomfort, reflection, confusion, ego bruising, insecurity, and eventually regret. And that's what makes your disappearance so powerful. Not because you're trying to hurt them, but because you're reclaiming your peace. Stoic principles remind us that we cannot control other people's behavior, but we can control our proximity to it. Disappearing is not about punishment, it's about self-preservation. You're not walking away to prove a point. You're walking away because you refuse to stay where you are undervalued. You're not using absence as a weapon. You're using it as a shield. In a world obsessed with noise, your silence becomes the unexpected turning point. Now, let me speak directly to you. The listener who has given too many chances. The person who stayed loyal while someone else became comfortable. The person who carried the emotional weight of the connection. The person who hoped their consistency would finally be appreciated. This video is here to remind you of something simple. You are not an option. You are not a backup plan. You are not a convenience. And disappearing is sometimes the only way the other person finally realizes that. Today, we explore the 11 uncomfortable emotional stages they go through once you remove yourself completely. The sting of rejection, the growing void, the rising panic, the obsessive curiosity, the regret, the fear of replacement, and eventually the painful realization that your absence is permanent. Each stage reveals a deeper truth about human behavior, emotional attachment, and why taking someone for granted is always a losing game. But before we break down those emotions, remember this. Disappearing is not about running away. It is about stepping into a higher level of self-awareness. It is about choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and dignity over desperation. It's choosing your worth. When someone manipulates your loyalty, silence restores your balance. When someone minimizes your presence, absence magnifies your value. When someone thought you'd never leave, your disappearance shatters that illusion instantly. This message speaks to anyone who has been drained by one-sided effort, ignored when they needed support, or overlooked by someone who assumed they could do better. You don't need to argue, you don't need to plead, you don't need to justify, you don't need to announce your departure, you simply step back and let your absence do the talking. People understand your value the loudest when your energy is no longer accessible. So if you're listening and thinking, yes, I'm tired, or I'm done being an option, this video is for you. If you've carried a relationship on your back or poured into someone who never poured back, this is your turning point. And if you've ever wondered what they really feel once you're gone, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why disappearing is sometimes the most powerful, most stoic, and most self-respecting choice you will ever make. As you watch, kindly subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell to get notified when we share our next video. When you simply disappear without noise, drama, or explanation, the first emotional stage they enter is the sting of rejection, a silent blow that hits harder than any confrontation. Most people expect reactions, arguments, or attempts to fix things. They prepare for noise, not silence. But when you walk away quietly, the message is louder than anything you could have said. It signals that you reached a point of clarity where their behavior no longer deserves a response. This is where the sting of rejection begins, and it is far more uncomfortable than they expected. Your unexpected disappearance shatters their illusion of control. In relationships, romantic, friendships, or even situationships, people often assume they have more power over you than they do. They assume you will always be available, always responding, always forgiving, always explaining. They assume you will tolerate disrespect because you've tolerated it before. When you vanish, you destroy that assumption instantly. This is the first psychological discomfort they feel. Their perceived influence collapses. They realize they miscalculated you. And Stoicism teaches something important here. Your silence is not revenge. It is the moment you stop negotiating your worth. People who take you for granted never expect consequences. They expect continuity. They expect convenience. They expect the version of you they have enjoyed, your loyalty, your attentiveness, your emotional presence, to remain even when they fail to match it. And because you gave consistently, they developed an unconscious entitlement to your energy. So when you pull away without warning, it disrupts their emotional ecosystem. Suddenly, the loyalty they dismissed is gone, and they don't know how to process it. The absence of what they took for granted becomes their punishment. This is why your disappearance hits harder than spoken words. Words can be debated, dismissed, or twisted. Silence cannot. Silence forces them to confront their reflection, how they acted, how they ignored red flags, how they failed to appreciate you. Silence corners them with accountability. It exposes their weaknesses. And because silence gives them no emotional ammunition, they cannot pretend to be the victim. Without your presence, they lose the audience for their excuses. The sting of rejection also emerges from losing access. One of the most painful emotional losses for someone who thought you'd always be available. Access is a privilege, not a right, but many forget that. They underestimate the value of your presence until it's gone. Your messages, your support, your comfort, your consistency. They were used to it. They relied on it. They expected it. Losing access creates a psychological shock similar to withdrawal. Humans crave what they can no longer reach, and your absence becomes a mental itch they cannot scratch. This is where they begin to feel emotional discomfort they can't express publicly. Pride won't let them admit it, but internally they feel a loss that gnaws at them. And it goes deeper. They realize you didn't disappear because you were weak. You disappeared because you were strong enough to walk away. That realization bruises their ego. Most people believe you need them more than they need you. They believe you are too emotional, too attached, too invested to ever leave. When you do, it rewrites the story they created about your role in their life. They must confront the painful truth. They were not as important to you as they assumed. You found peace in the silence they feared. You found strength in the distance that unsettles them. The sting of rejection is also tied to one thing they never want to admit. They didn't believe you had the courage to choose yourself. People often mistake kindness for weakness. They assume empathy means dependency. But Stoicism teaches that true strength is restraint. Walking away from chaos, not participating in emotional battles you've outgrown. Your disappearance reveals your strength with clarity. It exposes that you were not attached. You were committed. And when commitment is no longer reciprocated, you detach quietly and preserve your dignity. This emotional stage forces them to think. They replay the last conversations, they analyze the last messages. They suddenly become detectives of their own mistakes. They look for clues they ignored. They wonder why you left so calmly. And this searching is uncomfortable because it reveals the truth they avoided while you were still present. They failed to meet you halfway. They failed to value you. They failed to treat you with the consistency you gave so freely. Your absence creates a vacuum where you once provided stability. That vacuum amplifies their insecurities. They question their attractiveness, their worth, their behavior, their decisions. They wonder if you found someone better, someone who appreciates you the way they never did. They wonder if you're happier. They imagine you moving on effortlessly. And because they cannot confirm any of it, the uncertainty becomes torment. Uncertainty is one of the most powerful psychological discomforts, and your silence intensifies it. This is the sting of rejection, not a dramatic ending, but a quiet shift of power. You stop showing up. You stop waiting for them to change. You stop repeating yourself. You stop tolerating inconsistency. And once you leave their emotional orbit, they suddenly realize how much space you held. The pain they feel isn't because you hurt them. It's because you stopped letting them hurt you. It's because they lost the comfort of someone who cared deeply while they played loosely. Your disappearance reminds them of a truth rooted in Stoic philosophy. You are responsible for protecting your peace, and sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is walking away without explanation. That is what triggers the first emotional stage. They feel rejected not because you punished them, but because you finally chose yourself. When you disappear without warning, the second emotional stage they experience is the growing void, an emptiness that expands quietly, but aggressively. Your absence doesn't just remove a person. It removes a rhythm, a pattern, a presence they got used to. People rarely understand how much space you occupy in their emotional world until you are no longer there to fill it. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting what they ignored, overlooked, or dismissed. And this is where the discomfort begins to grow into something larger, a void they did not anticipate. At first, they assume your silence is temporary. They believe you will eventually message them, check on them, or fall back into the old dynamic. But as the hours turn to days and the days stretch without explanation, the void begins to deepen. This is where they feel the emotional consequences of losing daily access to you. Your presence created stability. Your consistency provided emotional reassurance. Your messages, your energy, your attention, they all formed part of their daily emotional diet. Losing that suddenly creates a deep, uncomfortable emptiness. What most people underestimate is how much emotional support they receive from someone they take for granted. They think your good morning messages, thoughtful check-ins, and consistent presence are small actions. They don't see them as nourishment. But when that nourishment disappears overnight, they feel the starvation. The void exposes how dependent they were, something they never wanted to admit. Their pride refuses to acknowledge it, but internally, the absence feels like a cold space expanding inside their routine. They miss the comfort of knowing you were always there. This is the moment when emotional discomfort evolves into stage 3, Obsessive curiosity. Your silence interrupts their emotional predictability, and their mind begins seeking an explanation. They start wondering, where did you go? Why aren't you talking? Should they reach out? Did they do something wrong? This curiosity is not innocent. It's obsessive, intrusive, and fueled by insecurity. Humans are wired to seek closure, and your silence denies that instinct. Without clarity, the mind begins to create stories. They start by asking simple questions. Where are you? Are you okay? But those questions quickly become emotional spirals. Who are you with? Are you giving your attention to someone else? Did someone replace them? Are you happier without them? The thought that you have moved on becomes a mental parasite. They imagine you laughing with someone new, sharing your time with someone more deserving, giving your loyalty to someone who values it. Their ego cannot stand that possibility, and that's when obsessive curiosity becomes overwhelming. This is where your silence becomes more powerful than any words. Silence is unpredictable. Silence gives no clues. Silence leaves them suspended between hope and fear. Every hour you do not respond becomes a psychological trigger. In their attempt to figure out your disappearance, they begin obsessively replaying old conversations, rereading messages, and trying to piece together what they missed. That obsessive loop is their mind trying to fill the void your presence used to occupy. Your absence becomes a mystery they cannot solve. And the human mind hates unsolved mysteries, especially those tied to ego, rejection, or emotional insecurity. This is why silence is such a powerful Stoic strategy. It forces clarity on your end and chaos on theirs. You step into peace while they fall into mental noise. You create distance while they create stories. You move forward quietly while they stay stuck in the narrative of what they think should have happened. The insecurity your silence triggers is deeper than they realize. They begin questioning their value. They wonder what made you leave so effortlessly. The idea that you might be unbothered scares them. The idea that you may have emotionally detached long before you walked away unsettles them. Silence makes them consider that they were the problem all along, something they avoided thinking about when you were still present. Your absence exposes their guilt, their arrogance, and their inconsistency, and then paranoia sets in, not the dramatic type, but the quiet kind that creeps into daily routines. They check their phone more than usual. They wonder if you unfollowed them. They watch your online status. They stalk your social media stories. They create scenarios in their head based on your lack of activity. They begin comparing themselves to imaginary people they believe you are spending time with. They fear being replaced. They feel threatened by the possibility that your silence means freedom, not for them, but for you. Intrusive thoughts begin to take over, especially at night when distractions fade. They ask themselves questions that burn their ego. What if you're happier without them? What if someone else is appreciating you in ways they never did? What if you finally recognized your worth and left them behind intentionally? These thoughts are painful because they highlight what they refused to face when you were still around, that they contributed to the distance growing between you. Obsessive curiosity becomes a cycle. Insecurity, overthinking, fear, guilt, and more overthinking. They analyze your last words. They try to decode your silence. They wonder if you are testing them or punishing them, but they fail to see the truth. Your disappearance is not manipulation. It is liberation. Stoicism teaches that withdrawal is not about controlling others. It is about mastering yourself. You left because peace required it. You became silent because noise was draining you. You disappeared because staying would have cost you more than leaving. Meanwhile, the void continues expanding. The longer you remain silent, the more their mind fills the emptiness with assumptions, fantasies, fears, and regrets. And as the void deepens, so does their obsession. Your absence becomes the loudest thing in their life. They feel it in the quiet moments. They feel it when something reminds them of you. They feel it when they realize they no longer have access to someone who gave them emotional richness they undervalued. This is the power of disappearance. It forces them into a psychological journey they never wanted to take. The void you leave behind becomes their teacher. The silence you maintain becomes their mirror. The obsessive curiosity they suffer becomes their emotional consequence. And none of it is intentional punishment. It is simply what happens when someone loses a person they thought would never leave. As the days pass and your silence settles in like a quiet storm, they enter the fourth emotional stage, deep self-reflection. This is the point where the noise of anger, denial, and ego begins to fade, and something far more uncomfortable rises to the surface: awareness. Without your presence to distract them, without your messages to soften the tension, without your reassurance to neutralize conflict, they are left alone with their thoughts. And the mind, when unshielded, becomes brutally honest. Their mind starts replaying every mistake they made, sometimes in slow motion, sometimes like a fast loop they can't shut off. They remember the times you showed up for them when they were too busy or too careless to appreciate it. They remember the moments when you voiced your needs and they dismissed them. They remember the days you reached out and they responded with coldness, inconsistency, or entitlement. Every moment they overlooked, every kindness they took for granted, becomes a scene they cannot escape. Deep self-reflection has a sting. They finally see their behavior from your perspective. Without you there to offer reassurance, explanation, or emotional cushioning, the truth feels harsher. They begin to understand something they refused to acknowledge before. You didn't leave because you were emotional. You left because they were negligent. You didn't disappear out of manipulation. You disappeared because they made staying emotionally exhausting. This is where internal blame replaces external excuses. When you were still present, they could justify everything. They could tell themselves you were overreacting. They could minimize your feelings. They could blame your sensitivity, your expectations, your attitude. They could twist their behavior into something harmless, something situational, something you misunderstood. But now, there is no one to argue with, no one to debate, no one to mirror their reasoning back to them. With you gone, their ability to distort reality weakens. And then the truth hits them. They were the reason the relationship deteriorated. Their inconsistency created the distance. Their dismissiveness created the silence. Their lack of effort pushed you toward the exit. Their ego kept them from appreciating you while they had you. This internal blaming isn't dramatic. It's a slow burn. It begins with small realizations and grows into a heavy emotional weight. They start recognizing patterns they avoided acknowledging for months or years. This is the cost of silence. It makes excuses impossible and accountability unavoidable. One of the hardest parts of self-reflection is the discomfort of confronting their own behavior without your reassurance. You were always the one who softened things, the one who explained things, the one who mediated emotional tension. When they acted poorly, you gave them space. When they hurt you, you forgave them. When they pulled away, you leaned in. You were the emotional anchor that prevented them from facing the full impact of their actions. But now, without you there, their behavior echoes loudly in their memory. They replay moments where they dismissed your concerns. They remember times you expressed hurt, and they minimized it. They recall how they treated you casually while expecting you to treat them seriously. They begin to see how selfishness, laziness, or emotional immaturity shaped their decisions, and the guilt comes with force. They begin to think, did I push too hard? Was I too cold? Did I take them for granted? These questions mark the beginning of accountability, the part they avoided for far too long. Your silence is the catalyst for this emotional unraveling. Silence is powerful because it denies emotional shortcuts. Silence doesn't argue. Silence doesn't defend. Silence doesn't explain. Silence forces reflection because the brain hates emotional emptiness. When you stop filling the space with your voice, they hear the echo of their own mistakes. That echo becomes a teacher they cannot ignore. This is when the Stoic principle becomes clear. Withdrawal brings clarity. When you detach, you no longer participate in their cycles, and it exposes the cycle for what it is. They now see that the dynamic only worked because you carried it. You held the emotional weight. You were the one who showed up. You were the one who tried. You were the one who communicated. And without your effort, everything collapses, and they must face why. Self-reflection makes them confront truths that damage their ego. They realize they weren't as emotionally mature as they believed. They realize they weren't as attentive, consistent, or caring as they pretended to be. They realize that they acted entitled to your loyalty. That recognition is painful because it contradicts the narrative they built about themselves. People love seeing themselves as good, loving, and responsible. But silence exposes the gap between who they think they are and how they actually behaved. And then comes the hardest truth. They thought you would stay no matter what. They believed you would tolerate their cold periods, their mixed signals, their broken promises. They believed your loyalty was permanent. Your disappearance proves it wasn't. The shock of realizing they misjudged you becomes a turning point. They finally understand that you were not afraid to walk away. You simply waited for the moment you respected yourself more than the connection. This stage of deep reflection is uncomfortable because it's no longer about losing you, it's about losing the version of themselves they believed in. They must confront their selfishness, their carelessness, their emotional immaturity. They must acknowledge that they failed to show up when it mattered. And this level of self-awareness is painful because it forces them into emotional accountability. Your silence becomes the consequence they gave themselves. Not because you punished them, but because they finally see what they lost and why. In that quiet space you created, they grow restless. They wish they could apologize. They wish they could undo the damage. They wish they had listened. They wish they understood your worth earlier. But now, all they have are their thoughts, and those thoughts become their emotional burden. This is the power of Stoic withdrawal. It doesn't aim to hurt, it aims to protect. And in protecting yourself, you reveal the truth they refuse to see. Their self-reflection becomes the emotional mirror they avoided for too long, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. There comes a moment in your disappearance when the emotional tide shifts. After denial, confusion, obsessive curiosity, and uncomfortable self-reflection, they enter the fifth emotional stage, the urge to pursue you. This is the point where silence breaks them down. This is when the person who once acted indifferent begins to move with urgency. And the strange part, the more silent you remain, the stronger their impulse becomes. What began as mild curiosity transforms into a deep, gnawing desire to regain your attention. Your absence, once dismissed, now becomes unbearable. The shift from indifference to desperation happens quietly at first. They start checking their phone more frequently, expecting to see your name pop up. They replay old conversations and realize how deeply intertwined you were in their daily life. The things they brushed off now bother them. Your silence pokes at their ego, their fears, and their insecurity. They assumed you would reach out eventually, but the longer you stay silent, the more they panic internally. That panic is the fuel for the pursuit. This is when they begin taking action. The first attempts are subtle. A random text, a casual hey, a meme you might like, a question you've already answered before. They send these messages not because they have something genuine to say, but because they miss the emotional access they once took for granted. Each message is a test. Will you reply? Have you truly moved on? Do you still care? Your silence gives them no confirmation, and that uncertainty intensifies the urge to reach out again. When the subtle attempts fail, they escalate. They begin sending longer texts, the kind that hint at nostalgia or regret. They scroll through old photos of you, photos they never appreciated when they had you, and suddenly feel a rush of longing. They might even, accidentally, like an old picture, or watch your stories repeatedly, hoping you'll notice. These actions are not accidental. They are emotional signals. They want you to see them trying. They want you to see that they miss you. They want you to break the silence first. Late-night messages become the next stage. Nights are dangerous for people who are losing someone they didn't appreciate. Silence is heavier. Loneliness is louder. And the mind becomes more honest when the world is quiet. This is when they send emotional texts, unfiltered confessions, unfinished apologies, attempts to reconnect based on guilt or longing. They might say they miss you. They might say they're thinking about you. They might try to reopen doors they closed themselves. They reach out not because they suddenly became better, but because your silence exposed their emptiness. The shift into desperation becomes even more obvious when they start overanalyzing your online presence. They watch your status, your activity, your posts. They try to decode what your silence means. Are you ignoring them intentionally? Are you happy without them? Have you replaced them? This curiosity transforms into a chase. And here is where the emotional dynamic flips. Role reversal. The person who once acted unavailable becomes the one who pursues. The one who once made you question yourself begins questioning everything. The one who once underestimated your value now fights to regain access to you. This role reversal is not accidental. It is the natural outcome of undervaluing someone who eventually chooses themselves. Stoic philosophy teaches that withdrawing from what drains you is not weakness. It is mastery. You didn't disappear to be chased. You disappeared because your peace required distance. But your disappearance forces them to confront a painful truth. They were never the prize. You were. When they begin pursuing you, it is not just about love or attachment. It is about restoring control. Losing you bruised their ego. Losing access made them insecure. Losing stability made them anxious. Chasing you becomes a way to regain emotional balance. But the irony is this: the more they chase, the more they realize they never really understood your worth. They misjudged your strength. They thought you needed them. Now they see you needed peace more than you needed the connection. Your silence makes their pursuit stronger for one simple reason. Silence creates a psychological vacuum. The human mind cannot tolerate unanswered questions. When someone disappears, the brain searches for patterns, resolution, closure. That searching becomes obsession. Obsession becomes pursuit. The pursuit becomes desperation. Silence triggers all of it. Words give clarity. Silence gives imagination, and imagination is far more powerful than explanation. Your silence also exposes their dependency. They relied on your forgiveness, your softness, your effort. They believed you would always be emotionally available. But when that availability disappears, they feel the loss like a withdrawal. They chase not just you, but the emotional comfort you used to provide. They want the version of themselves they had when you were still in their life. Someone who felt valued, desired, admired, or supported. Without you, that version collapses. The urge to pursue you also comes from regret. Regret is one of the most painful human emotions. It has a way of rewriting memory and intensifying longing. They begin remembering the good moments, not the bad ones. They remember your kindness, not the conflict. They remember how you made them feel alive, safe, important. They suddenly realize the things you did that no one else ever did for them. With regret comes nostalgia, and with nostalgia comes pursuit. But what they do not realize is this: their pursuit does not come from deep love. It comes from deep discomfort. It comes from losing a source of emotional stability. It comes from the pain of seeing someone they thought they controlled slip away effortlessly. It comes from the fear of being replaced. It comes from ego, insecurity, and the need to repair the image they have of themselves. The more silent you remain, the greater the pursuit becomes. Because silence does not satisfy the ego. Silence does not feed entitlement. Silence does not reward inconsistency. Silence forces them to act, to feel, to acknowledge their own mistakes. And in that emotional chaos, they begin chasing the very person they once took for granted. This is the stage where they realize something life-changing. Losing you was easy for you and devastating for them, and that is why the urge to pursue you becomes irresistible. Silence made your value undeniable. Silence made your absence powerful. Silence made them see what they never wanted to accept. You were the one they should have cherished. Have you learnt anything so far? Mention whatever you've learnt in the comments section. I'll be there, reading all comments. When you disappear from someone's life, the sixth emotional stage begins with a brief, deceptive feeling: relief. At first, they may experience a temporary high, a shallow sense of freedom. Without your presence constantly demanding attention, without the weight of accountability or your emotional needs pressing in, they feel light, unburdened, almost invincible. They may tell themselves, "Finally, I don't have to deal with them anymore," as if the loss of your presence is a liberation. For a fleeting moment, they convince themselves they are the ones in control, that life without you will be easier, more flexible, and less emotionally demanding. But this sense of relief is fragile. It is a superficial response to an emotional shock, a psychological sugar rush that cannot last. The moment they are alone, when the distractions of friends, work, or casual entertainment fade, reality hits. The quiet hours, the late nights, the empty spaces in the day, reveal the depth of the void your absence has created. And with that realization comes the crash, the inescapable wave of regret. They begin to see, clearly and painfully, what they lost. The emotional stability, the connection, the warmth, and the attention they once took for granted now exist only in memory. Regret is sharper because it arrives when no one is around to soften it. It is raw, private, and inescapable. Regret becomes their internal torment. They replay past interactions, scrutinizing moments where they failed to appreciate you. They recall dismissive remarks, ignored texts, missed opportunities to connect, and selfish choices that pushed you further away. Each memory is a reminder that the person they undervalued is now unavailable. They may even attempt mental bargaining. Maybe if I act differently, they'll come back. Or, if I show them I'm happier now, maybe they'll notice. But no matter how they rationalize, your silence amplifies their awareness that their relief was an illusion and that their behavior contributed to the very loss they are now desperate to reverse. From regret emerges the seventh emotional stage, the manipulation games. Once they realize they cannot undo the loss through reflection alone, their ego and fear take control. They attempt strategies to regain your attention and test your emotional reaction. These games are often subtle at first, posting on social media to provoke jealousy, acting unusually confident, or trying to project an image of happiness without you. They craft stories in public spaces, hoping you will notice, hoping to elicit a response. Every action is designed to manipulate, to regain some semblance of control over the situation they now understand they cannot naturally dominate. Acting unbothered becomes their shield. They project emotional stability, as if your disappearance has had no effect on them, but internally the turmoil is constant. They may post cryptic statuses showing that life is fine, that they are moving on, or that they are somehow thriving without you. The posts are carefully curated to make you question your choices, to provoke a reaction, or to make you regret leaving. They may even fabricate moments of fun or success, trying to make it appear as if they are happier without your presence. Each of these attempts is a form of emotional signaling, subtle, desperate, and entirely reactive to the void you left. Despite all these attempts, their strategies fail to work once you have mastered silence. The principle is simple. Attention is power. When they were accustomed to having you respond, every provocation, every cryptic message, every display of confidence triggered interaction. But when you no longer engage, when your silence is consistent, the game collapses. They can manipulate only those who respond. You have removed yourself from the feedback loop. You are no longer available to validate their attempts, confirm their fears, or soothe their insecurities. The more they play, the more apparent it becomes that they no longer have influence over you. The failure of their manipulation attempts intensifies the emotional discomfort they feel. Each post, each subtle attempt, and each act of emotional provocation serves as a mirror reflecting their lack of control. They realize that the person they underestimated is not chasing, not responding, not negotiating. They are moving forward, independent, unshaken, and unaffected. That realization fuels even more frustration, regret, and anxiety. Every effort to regain influence becomes a reminder of the power they have lost. The harder they try to manipulate, the clearer it becomes that their actions are futile. This stage highlights a critical Stoic lesson. Detachment is strength. When you withdraw and maintain consistent silence, you do not engage in emotional battles. You do not counteract manipulation with emotion. You do not seek validation or attempt to correct their perceptions. You simply exist outside the sphere of their control. Your absence is a powerful teacher, forcing them to confront their behavior and the consequences of taking you for granted. Silence in this context is not passive. It is a deliberate, strategic demonstration of self-respect and mastery. The temporary high of relief is ultimately overshadowed by the weight of regret, which grows as they realize that freedom without you is hollow. The attempts to manipulate, the social media games, the projected unbothered attitude, they are all temporary facades that cannot erase the truth. They lost someone who added unique value to their life. Your silence forces them to face this reality without distraction or excuse. They are left with only their own thoughts, reflecting on what they failed to appreciate and why their strategies for regaining control are ineffective. In essence, these two stages, relief versus regret and manipulation games, reveal the psychological consequences of your disappearance. Your absence creates a vacuum that they initially misinterpret as freedom. But the vacuum quickly becomes a mirror of their own shortcomings. Their attempts to regain power or influence fail against the consistent barrier of your silence. They experience the highs and lows of freedom and regret, but you remain steady, unmoved, and in control of your own emotional landscape. This is the ultimate lesson. True emotional mastery lies in withdrawal, in self-respect, and in refusing to engage with attempts to manipulate or control your peace. By remaining silent, By refusing to participate in their emotional games, you transform their frustration and regret into self-awareness. You make them confront uncomfortable truths about their behavior, their dependence, and their inability to appreciate your worth. And in doing so, you reclaim your emotional independence, demonstrating that the most powerful response to being taken for granted is not argument or confrontation, but absence. Silence is not passive. It is decisive. It is transformative. It is your ultimate tool. Silence is one of the most powerful tools in the emotional arsenal, and when you disappear from someone's life, it becomes a weapon they cannot defend against. In the 8th emotional stage, the weight of silence settles over them like a heavy fog, pervasive and unavoidable. Unlike arguments, confrontations, or emotional outbursts, silence cannot be countered with reason, deflected with excuses, or ignored with distraction. It is steady, unyielding, and relentless, forcing them to face their own thoughts and feelings without the buffer of your presence. This stage is uniquely uncomfortable because it penetrates the mind and heart in ways words never could. When you were present, your voice acted as a stabilizer. Even during conflict, the back and forth of communication provided a rhythm, a structure that gave them reassurance, validation, or at least a predictable emotional outlet. When you leave, that rhythm disappears. The absence of your words creates a vacuum, and the human mind instinctively seeks to fill it. Without your input, their thoughts begin to spiral, replaying memories, analyzing every detail, and questioning every interaction. Every moment of silence becomes louder than any argument ever was because it carries the weight of unresolved emotions, unspoken truths, and missed opportunities. The psychological discomfort created by not knowing what you are thinking is profound. Humans are wired to seek closure, to understand intentions, and to predict behavior. When someone disappears, these instincts are thwarted. They cannot anticipate your reactions, cannot decipher your motives, and cannot know your feelings. This uncertainty triggers anxiety, insecurity, and even paranoia. They begin imagining scenarios, some realistic, some exaggerated, about where you are, what you are doing, and whether you have moved on. Every unanswered question amplifies their mental and emotional tension, leaving them restless and unsettled. Silence also undermines their sense of control. When they had consistent access to your attention, they felt powerful. They could influence your mood, guide conversations, or manipulate outcomes. Your availability was assumed, and that assumption fed their confidence. But when you vanish, that control evaporates. No matter how much they reach out, analyze your social media, or attempt to provoke a response, your consistent absence strips them of influence. The person who once dictated the emotional dynamics of the relationship now finds themselves powerless. That loss of control is deeply unsettling, especially for someone accustomed to taking you for granted. The longer silence continues, the heavier it feels. It is not mere quiet. It becomes a psychological weight, pressing on their mind, affecting their focus, productivity, and emotional stability. They notice it during mundane tasks, in the still moments of the day, or in the dark of night when distractions are gone. The silence reminds them of what they have lost and what they failed to value. Every time they consider reaching out, the empty space between you acts as a mirror, reflecting their inability to control or influence you. That mirror is unforgiving, and it forces them into a confrontation with the consequences of their behavior. In this stage, they may attempt to break the silence indirectly, but these efforts often backfire. They might check your social media repeatedly, looking for clues or validation. They may ask mutual friends about your whereabouts or emotional state, searching for any hint that they are still relevant to you. These attempts demonstrate their desperation, but simultaneously reinforce the power of your absence. The more they seek engagement, the more evident it becomes that your silence cannot be breached. You are no longer participating in the game, and that absence of engagement only magnifies the psychological impact. The weight of silence is amplified by human cognitive bias. The mind tends to focus on what is missing, especially when it once existed abundantly. When they had your attention, loyalty, or affection, it was easy to take it for granted. Once gone, the scarcity triggers obsessive thinking, heightened emotional sensitivity, and a profound awareness of loss. They may begin recalling small gestures they overlooked, words they dismissed, or moments they failed to appreciate. Each memory reinforces the discomfort of the present silence, and they are forced to sit with their guilt, regret, and longing simultaneously. Another critical aspect of this stage is how silence fosters self-reflection and personal accountability. Without your input, they can no longer blame misunderstandings on miscommunication. They can no longer deflect responsibility by claiming they were misunderstood or that you were too sensitive. Silence removes the buffer and leaves them alone with their choices. They must confront their behavior, their mistakes, and the emotional consequences of taking you for granted. This is uncomfortable, but it is also transformative, forcing growth and awareness that would not occur if your presence continued to mediate the relationship dynamics. In Stoic philosophy, silence is not passive. It is deliberate, intentional, and strategic. When you choose not to respond, you are not being cruel or manipulative. You are maintaining boundaries, protecting your emotional space, and asserting self-respect. The weight of silence becomes a natural teacher, demonstrating to the other person the consequences of their actions. It is more effective than confrontation because it bypasses defensiveness. Arguments provoke counter-arguments. Manipulation provokes counter-manipulation. But silence leaves no avenue for deflection. It confronts them with reality. They have lost access to someone they undervalued, and there is nothing they can do to reverse it through ego-driven tactics. The weight of silence reinforces the power dynamic in your favor. They are left reacting, obsessing, and attempting to regain control, while you move forward in peace. Your emotional independence and unwavering detachment highlight their dependence and their failure to act when you were available. By maintaining silence, you transform discomfort into clarity, regret into self-awareness, and absence into a lesson they cannot ignore. The more they struggle with your quiet, the more they understand the value of what they lost, and the more irreversible your absence becomes in shaping their perception of you. In essence, this stage demonstrates that the loudest statements in human relationships are often unspoken. Words can argue, explain, or justify, but silence communicates something far deeper: autonomy, self-respect, and emotional power. The weight of silence is not an attack. It is a reflection of your worth, and it forces them to confront what they ignored when you were present. It is uncomfortable, unavoidable, and transformative, a psychological force that ensures they experience the impact of your disappearance long before any conversation could have delivered the same lesson. As your absence continues, they reach the 9th emotional stage, the fear of permanent loss. This is the moment when denial no longer protects them and the full reality sinks in. They begin to understand, with a sinking sense of dread, that you may truly be gone. For weeks, or even months, they may have told themselves that you would eventually return, that the disruption in the relationship was temporary, or that your disappearance was a reaction to something trivial that could be corrected. But in this stage, hope gives way to recognition. You are not waiting for them. You are not caught in indecision. You have moved beyond the patterns they relied on to maintain emotional control, and the fear that comes with permanent loss begins to consume them. This fear is not abstract. It is visceral. It manifests as anxiety, sleepless nights, and obsessive thoughts about your life without them. They imagine you in spaces where they are not, with people who were never part of the equation before. And suddenly, every scenario provokes emotional discomfort. They fear that the unique connection they dismissed or ignored can no longer be restored. The certainty of their own mistakes becomes unavoidable. Silence has already done its work. It forced reflection, exposed their dependence, and revealed the consequences of taking you for granted. Now, the emotional weight of finality hits like a wave, unrelenting and heavy. Alongside this fear comes the 10th emotional stage: panic about replacement. Human nature drives the mind to assess threats, and in relationships, the most immediate threat is another person taking the place they once ignored. They begin imagining someone else stepping into your life, someone who appreciates your presence, values your time, and treats you with the respect they once took for granted. This imagined replacement magnifies their anxiety, making the absence more unbearable. What was once a simple curiosity, wondering if you were okay, becomes a desperate, urgent need to act. The fear of permanent loss intensifies when combined with the possibility of someone else filling the role they failed to honor. Panic-driven attempts to reconnect often follow. This may start subtly, with tentative messages or brief attempts to gauge your attention. But as fear escalates, so does desperation. They may send long, emotionally charged messages, attempting apologies, explanations, or pleas for understanding. These attempts are frantic because they are fueled by the dual pressures of finality and potential replacement. Each interaction is a test. Will you respond, forgive, or re-engage? The stakes feel enormous to them because your absence has stripped away the emotional guarantees they once assumed. The person who thought you would always be available now faces a scenario where you may never return, and that realization drives them to act impulsively. This stage exposes their dependency, previously masked by confidence or indifference. Panic is a clear signal that the emotional equilibrium they relied on from your presence has been disrupted. They can no longer take you for granted, and every moment without contact heightens the urgency of their attempts to regain access. The fear that you might find someone else, someone who values what they never did, acts as a catalyst. It is a psychological pressure cooker. They want to reach you, they want reassurance, and they want control, all at once. But the power dynamic has irrevocably shifted. Your absence ensures that no matter how frantic their efforts, you remain the architect of your emotional autonomy. The realization of permanent loss also forces a deeper confrontation with their own behavior. They are not just afraid of losing you, they are afraid of what their loss says about them. They confront the truth. They allowed someone irreplaceable to slip away through negligence, arrogance, or emotional complacency. No external factor can mask this truth. Silence has stripped away excuses and rationalizations, leaving them alone with the reality of their mistakes. Panic about replacement compounds this awareness. They do not just fear losing you, they fear that the emotional gap you once filled will be occupied by someone else who they cannot compete with. This heightens both anxiety and regret to levels that cannot be ignored. From a Stoic perspective, these stages illuminate the consequences of emotional entitlement and lack of appreciation. You do not create panic or fear through cruelty. Rather, your deliberate absence serves as a mirror, reflecting the value they ignored. Fear of permanent loss and panic about replacement are natural outcomes of self-respect and boundary setting. They cannot force you to return because you have reclaimed your emotional independence. In essence, the discomfort they experience is the result of their own choices, magnified by your absence and your refusal to participate in their emotional manipulations. This stage also demonstrates the principle of non-attachment and deliberate withdrawal. By maintaining distance, you provide them with no validation, no comfort, and no opportunity to control your emotions. Your disappearance is not vindictive, it is corrective. It enforces accountability in the most potent way, by allowing them to experience the full weight of loss and the threat of someone else stepping in. Every action they take in panic, every desperate attempt to reconnect, confirms the power you hold simply by existing independently of their expectations. Furthermore, fear and panic do more than provoke action. They initiate reflection. The person who thought they were invincible now recognizes their emotional vulnerability. They see the direct consequences of underestimating your value. Every moment of imagined replacement, every sleepless night thinking about what they lost, serves as a lesson in respect, appreciation, and awareness. The intensity of these feelings underscores a simple truth. Absence is more instructive than presence. You do not argue. You do not justify. You let the void, the silence, and the finality of your choices teach the lesson they ignored while you were available. Finally, the fear of permanent loss and panic about replacement marks a turning point in their emotional journey. It is the apex of discomfort, regret, and self-realization. They understand fully and painfully that your absence is not temporary. They see the consequences of their neglect. They confront the possibility of a life without you entirely, and the potential for someone else to occupy the space they left vacant. By this point, they are emotionally unmoored, scrambling for control, desperate to correct past mistakes, and facing an undeniable truth. You are no longer an option to be taken for granted. The power now resides with you, and their discomfort is the natural result of having lost access to someone they failed to honor. The 11th emotional stage is the culmination of the entire journey, your emotional independence and Stoic transformation. By the time someone has experienced the fear, panic, regret, and obsessive curiosity from your disappearance, they reach a point of profound realization. This is the stage where your absence is no longer just about the discomfort it causes them. It becomes a symbol of your inner evolution, your self-respect, and the unshakable strength you have cultivated by prioritizing your own peace and emotional clarity. Your disappearance communicates something far more powerful than words could. You are complete without their validation, and their opinions no longer dictate your emotional state. Emotional independence is the ultimate lesson for both you and the other person. While they were scrambling to regain control, analyzing every move, and fearing permanent loss, you were quietly reclaiming yourself. You stopped seeking approval and stopped allowing their behavior to influence your happiness. This stage is where the Stoic principle of self-mastery truly manifests. By stepping away, you demonstrate that your well-being is not contingent on someone else's attention or acknowledgement. Your emotional equilibrium is no longer tethered to their actions, which is why your disappearance has such a seismic impact. They cannot influence you, they cannot provoke you, they cannot control you. That realization is deeply uncomfortable for them because it exposes how dependent they once were on your presence. As they reflect on your independence, the discomfort they feel is magnified. They observe that no matter how much they tried to manipulate, provoke, or chase, you remain steady, unaffected, and self-contained. Unlike earlier stages, where panic, curiosity, and regret were fleeting reactions, your emotional independence is enduring. It is visible in the way you carry yourself, in your absence of reaction to their attempts, and in your unwavering commitment to your own life. For someone who assumed they had influence over your attention and emotions, witnessing this level of self-sufficiency is jarring. They realize that the very person they believed could be manipulated or controlled has transcended the dynamic that once allowed them power. This stage also reinforces the Stoic truth that walking away is not a loss, it is mastery. When you choose to disappear from someone who takes you for granted, you are not punishing them. You are reclaiming your dignity and asserting the boundary that protects your emotional health. The discomfort they feel is a reflection of the consequences of their choices, not an indication of your wrongdoing. Silence, absence, and refusal to engage are deliberate tools of self-respect. By refusing to participate in emotional manipulation or reactive drama, you achieve clarity and strength while simultaneously teaching them the value of what they lost. This is mastery in its purest form. The ability to act according to your principles, independent of external validation or reaction. From a psychological perspective, your independence forces them into one final confrontation with their own behavior. All prior stages, curiosity, regret, panic, and manipulation, build up to this realization. They see that their attempts to regain control, provoke a reaction, or manipulate your attention are futile. They recognize that you no longer require them to feel complete, and this breaks the illusion of their prior power. The knowledge that you have grown beyond their influence generates profound discomfort, because it confirms that they missed their chance to appreciate your value when it mattered. Your independence is both an ending and a lesson, demonstrating that the consequences of neglect and entitlement are inescapable when someone refuses to compromise their self-respect. For the audience, this stage carries a critical message. Reclaiming your peace is not passive, it is active, intentional, and transformative. When you choose silence over engagement, absence over compromise, and self-respect over validation, you shift the balance of power in your life. You send a clear signal that your energy is valuable, your time is finite, and your emotional well-being is non-negotiable. No text, no call, no social media post, and no manipulation from the other person can alter your state. Your independence becomes the ultimate boundary, unbreachable and non-negotiable. In practical terms, this means focusing on your own growth, your own routines, your own passions, and your own clarity, while refusing to re-enter dynamics that compromise your dignity. The Stoic principle behind this stage emphasizes control over self, not over others. You cannot dictate how someone feels in your absence, nor can you ensure they learn their lesson. What you can control, and what you have mastered by reaching this stage, is your own mind, your own reactions, and your own boundaries. Walking away is not a loss. It is a demonstration of virtue, patience, and strategic wisdom. It is proof that your value is inherent, not conditional on someone else's recognition. They may feel fear, panic, regret, or discomfort, but none of these emotions can penetrate the stability you have built through deliberate absence. Furthermore, your emotional independence reframes relationships themselves. It establishes a standard that you will not be taken for granted, that your energy is not a commodity to be consumed at whim, and that self-respect is non-negotiable. Anyone who observes this transformation recognizes that you have moved beyond reactive behavior and into proactive mastery of your own emotional life. This stage is liberating because it frees you from the endless cycle of validation seeking and manipulation that often defines human interactions. The discomfort they feel is a byproduct of their own failure to respect your presence before you chose to protect it. In conclusion, the 11th emotional stage is the apex of both your Stoic journey and the psychological impact of disappearance. Your emotional independence communicates more than words could. It signals self-respect, mastery, and the inescapable consequences of their choices. They feel discomfort because they have lost access to something invaluable, something they once undervalued. For you, this stage represents clarity, peace, and empowerment. Walking away is not defeat. It is strategic, deliberate, and transformative. Your silence and absence are the ultimate assertion of worth. The lesson is clear. Reclaim your peace, choose silence, choose dignity, and honor your emotional independence. By doing so, you not only protect yourself, but also teach others the value of respect and presence. Disappearance is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of mastery. It is proof that you are no longer reliant on external validation, that your happiness and strength are internal, and that your life is no longer subject to the control of those who fail to recognize your worth. This is the ultimate Stoic transformation. Walking away with grace, owning your independence, and thriving beyond the reach of anyone who once underestimated you. Do you like this video? Kindly subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell to get notified when we share our next video.